This is the COVID czar from New York City, and it's Dr. Jay Varna, and he has become infamous in the past week thanks to people, I guess, like myself, because I am a Mug Club subscriber. I got a couple of those mugs upstairs, and Steven Crowder. We are going to disagree politically on I would say international issues, but specifically Israel Palestine. But most domestic issues, we would get on the same page and be like, freedom here, yeah, okay. So these types of things that are unfreedom, I'm very happy to say that the Mug Club undercover reporter, honeypot chick, whoever's out there that ran those cameras, she's got multiple angles going at those interactions, which is kind of impressive for undercover work. And she's putting herself in a somewhat dangerous situation because you never know how shady and grimy these people are that are being caught in these stories. So, or you don't know what you're going to hear in this case. So I'm sure she was a little surprised, but maybe not. Maybe they had chatted online like RFK and that chick from CNN who just got busted for they had electronic freak off just via text. That was his recent affair. He had a text with a chick from he'd never met in person. Anyway, emotional cheating aside, let's go to Dr. Jay Varma getting caught with his dick in the mouse trap there, whatever trap they set over there at the Mug Club. And let's go to the undercover video. It is subtitled. It's difficult to hear in some places, but most of it is pretty clear. It's pretty darn clear. It's not chopped up and taken out of context. I would love to hear him explain what context these things are supposed to be set in. But for your consideration and for inclusion in this week's historical time capsule, if you're watching This Week in History from the future, it's a crazy week. This is just the tip of the iceberg tonight. So we're going to start slow with Dr. Jay Varna and Steven Crowder over at Mug Club.
I had to work for the mayor of New York City for a year and a half. I ran the code response for the city.
I actually was the one who convinced the mayor to make it a mandate.
So the way we do it in public health is we make it very uncomfortable to be unvaccinated. They didn't get vaccinated because they heard it was safe. They gave in because it was really hard.
Do you think you'd have gotten a hard time if New York City found out that you were having sex parties during COVID?
Yeah, it would have been a big deal. Yeah, it would have been real embarrassing.
Yeah.
So I want you to take yourself back to March of 2020, okay, mentally, the beginning of the COVID pandemic, right? The streets of New York City looked like a dystopian sci-fi movie, albeit with less charm and more hobo urine. No, more than normal for New York City. Now, it was even worse than the rest of the country. Right? Thousands of businesses were forced to close. Millions of New Yorkers lost their jobs overnight, and loved ones were forced to die alone in quarantine. And the man you're about to meet is responsible for all of it, Dr. Jay Varma.
I spent my career, I worked for the CDC for 20 years, so I kind of lived all over the world doing infectious disease work. So I used to spend time doing public health where I go to different, so I lived in Bangkok and in Beijing and in Ethiopia.
So exciting.
And so what I did was, my job was to go and help countries like build their systems to detect and respond to diseases.
Okay.
So kind of like during COVID where you had to set up a testing program and a vaccination program and you need to monitor the numbers. And that was like the type of thing I did for my career at CDC, is go to different countries and help them do that. The mayor's team contacted me because I was in New York before that.
Okay.
And they contacted me to come back, so I moved back from Ethiopia to New York to run the COVID response for the city. So I set up all the testing and vaccine program for the city. I actually was the one who convinced the mayor to make it a mandate. I was on TV for about a year and a half. So I was on a press conference every day for a year and a half, every morning at 10 o'clock.
What?
Yeah, with the mayor. I had to sit next to him.
For COVID?
Yeah, for COVID, yeah. I'm very Googleable, but I'm not like...
Okay, I didn't Google you. Maybe I should have.
You can Google me now.
Okay, I'll Google
if that turns you on.
Now, there's more to Dr. Varma than mere medical tyranny here. It's a classic story of the rules for thee, but not for me, as we see with a lot of unelected bureaucrats. But this story is not one about hypocrisy. I want to be clear. Everyone's a hypocrite. It's not lost on me. This is a story about those in charge not fearing what it is that they demanded you fear in a way that altered your life. You were told to fear going to church. You were told to fear meeting family, fear running your business, or even vote. Remember that? It was so dangerous, you needed to vote from home by any means possible, while you, the peasants, were locked down and not allowed to gather with more than 10 people at a time. Elites, like Jay Varma, well, he was hosting sex parties.
It's so funny. It's like because I did all this like deviant like sexual stuff while I was like like on TV and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And people were like, aren't you afraid? Aren't you embarrassed? And I was like, no, actually, I'm like really like I love being my authentic self. So every type of range of everything.
Okay.
And I've been to a lot of like sex parties, lots of like play parties and stuff like that.
Okay, so what were the sex parties like during COVID?
So that I didn't. So I never went to a like public type one. We actually had a like my wife and I like had one with our friends like in August of like that first summer. Because all our friends were just like, well, it wasn't so much sex. They were just like, I need to get like this energy out of me and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we rented a hotel. I had to be kind of sneaky about it because hotels didn't want people gathering there. Because I was like running the entire COVID response of the city, I like had a whole I had everything get tested the right way, told me where to get tested, showed me the results. It was fun. We all like took Molly and just like it was like 8 or 9 of us and then 8 to 10 of us in a room and everybody had a blast because everybody was like so pent up because it had been like everybody was just like stuck together and stuff like that. Yeah. And sometimes it isn't so much about like executive stuff. Sometimes it's just something about like bodies being close to each other, right? Just being like naked with friends. During COVID, we just had private parties. I think COVID was big. Yeah, so it was just home, in our home or other places. That was the one we did during COVID because in like it was like August 2020, all of our friends, people were friends and stuff who were all just play Poly World. Everybody was just like pent up, and so I did like a whole like testing protocol for everybody. It was a relatively small. I mean, small isn't like no COVID test. It was like 10 to 12 people.
Okay, so violate the draconian lockdowns that the rest of the population has to follow for a mass sex party once, shame on me. Violate your own draconian mandates again over a year later when your rules only allow for a max gathering of 50 people so that you can attend a drug-fueled underground dance party with 4 times that number of people. Shame on.
Now, officials say gatherings continue to play a role in the increase. While anyone planning on a big party, officials are telling you, think again.
The only way I could do this job for the city was if I had some way to blow off steam every now and then.
Do you think you'd have gotten like a hard time if like New York City found out that you're having sex parties during COVID?
Yeah, it would have been a big deal. Yeah, it would have been a real embarrassment.
Yeah, you can keep it. Yeah, keep it.
Actually, the only time I felt kind of nervous was fairly early on, right when we were about to do the vaccine mandate, right before we did it. I hadn't been to any like dance bars in New York City yet. And we went to some. We had a wild night. Like we went to like a boat. There's always dance parties on boats. And then we went to some like underground like dance party like underneath a bank in Wall Street. And we were all rolling. We were all taking Molly, and everybody's high. And I was so happy because I hadn't done that in like a year and a half, like a year or whatever. And but I was looking around being like, what are they seized because this was not
Wait,
COVID
when was
friendly.
that?
It was like May or June of 2021. So it was like the spring. So the vaccines had become available, but nobody had really kind of thought about having like, well, I had never thought of going to a big scale party.
Was the vaccine mandate out?
Not yet. It was for small groups. It was for certain city workers, but there wasn't a citywide, you can't go to clubs or bars yet. That happened in June.
So people were like losing their jobs at that time if they didn't get it?
There might have been, but it's a very small number of people. Most people, everybody can get it eventually.
How big was the party?
It was probably 200 people. It was like the bottom of some bank. And then when your turn comes up to get the vaccine, we want you to get that because that is the path to parties.
Okay, so that seems bad at first glance and second and all of them. But I'm willing to bet that giant sex parties are not what you missed most, and certainly not what you missed out on most during the COVID pandemic if you were in New York. Probably loved ones, holidays, family gatherings, especially around Thanksgiving and Christmas, that time where Governor Cuomo was sicking law enforcement on unsuspecting citizens and you were being chastised by your elected officials. What about that? What did Mr. Varma do then?
Health officials discouraging travel during the approaching holiday season as scores of cities are dealing with surges in coronavirus cases.
My wife's family was in Seattle, and they went back over Christmas, that first COVID Christmas. I couldn't go because publicly I encouraged New Yorkers not to travel. And so, the mayor was like, you really can't go with your family. You got to stay here. Because if they catch you on, if somebody takes a picture at the airport of you, they'll...
Did the mayor know about your party?
No. I don't talk about that part of my life.
Yeah.
Okay, that one's pretty rough too. But I'm sure these people believe some of what they espouse. For example, a lot of you who didn't get the vaccine, right, because you believe there was some kind of natural immunity if you'd already had the virus, and you were told absolutely not. That's not the case, especially in New York. Social distancing, masks, you need a minimum of 4 doses of the vaccine.
And if you're 50 years old or above, you need 4 doses.
I'm sure that's consistent when they don't know cameras are running, right?
I know people that won't have sex with someone that didn't get the COVID vaccine. And I don't know enough to know if that's like
Sorry, that's like a weird, I think that's a weird, belief that somehow, their body is different. It doesn't make any difference at all. Everybody's exposed to the virus. And you're exposed to the virus because it breathed on you or because you got injected you. It's the same immune response.
Okay, so it turns out science is a thing, and that one looks kind of bad. But let's not rush to judgment. Don't write Dr. Varma off as some power-hungry villain just yet. Good people sometimes do bad things, or they make mistakes. Those in charge could still have been looking out for you, and in no way does this prove that people like Dr. Varma get a thrill out of psychologically manipulating people to abuse their own power, exert control while completely disregarding the life-destroying rules that they apply to people like you, right? Right?
When it comes to the vaccine, I think people will believe it more if it's really consistently validated by healthcare professionals.
de Blasio.
Yeah.
So how did you convince him to do the mandate?
I had actually been talking to him about it since even before the vaccines were available. I was like, you're going to have to do it this way. And so we came up with this metaphor. We're going to climb this ladder. We're going to first start voluntarily, and then we're going to be pushing it.
So the way we do it in public health is we make it very uncomfortable to be unvaccinated. The vaccine's like, you can't get a job, you can't go to a restaurant, you can't go to school. It's like, I'm just going to get vaccinated.
So was it technically kind of forcing you?
Yeah, that's what you do. You force people by making it really uncomfortable. The car comes with seatbelts and airbags. You have to actively, and it beeps all the time. So you can still drive without a seatbelt, right? The car doesn't shut off, but it beeps all the time.
Right. So brilliant.
Yeah, that's the whole idea. The whole idea is you build barriers so that people are just gonna do it because I'm tired of being wrong.
So it was kind of forcing you.
Yeah, and the whole point of the education is, this is where I have all these talks I give people in public health about it. It's people think, oh, I'm going to give you lots of information so you'll do the right thing. No, the reason I give you the information is so that I'm going to make it really hard to be unvaccinated. And then I'm going to also give you a lot of information about getting vaccinated and why it's good. So that once you finally say, I'm just going to get vaccinated, you at least know that, at least they told me it's really safe. So do you understand the difference? They didn't get vaccinated because they heard it was safe. They gave in because it was really hard.
It's not so much about finding them and arresting them. It's about making the default, what we call the default choice, the easy one. So you just have to do it that way.
I mean, are people in Columbus smart enough to deal with this on their own?
No, that's why we require it. And that's why I told you about the education. It's I don't expect the education to change your behavior. I'm just going to make it really hard for you to do your job. And then I'll give you education so that when you finally give in, you'd be like, I guess it was the right thing.
Yeah. All I can say to people is that this is not a conspiracy. This is people working flat out, doing the best they possibly can.
I think the important thing here is just, again, be led by the facts and the data.
Oh, the COVID vaccine deniers?
Yeah.
They're nuts cases. I don't agree with them. They're gun cases. But the guys who are vaccinated are right-wing nut cases.
Yeah, I mean, but okay, what do we do with those people?
so I can't always just do what the right thing to do is. I have to also make sure it's the right thing with the whole like world of everybody else.
Ah, yes, those nutcases for whom Varma made life exceedingly difficult. Interesting fact, one of those nutcases was NBA star Kyrie Irving.
The team just announced that superstar point guard Kyrie Irving won't play or practice with the team until he's eligible under the local COVID-19 vaccination mandate.
There's a basketball player named Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving, he refused to get vaccinated. But because he played for the team in Brooklyn, because of the vaccine mandate that I passed, he was not allowed to play. So it became this huge national issue about why Kyrie Irving wasn't allowed to play basketball because he was refusing to get vaccinated. Like, this is a fun part of my life. So I got to be on, so the Wall Street Journal wrote a whole story about me being the one that blocked Kyrie Irving from playing basketball.
I was not expecting, a mandate to be brought down in a way that it wasn't going to allow me to play at all.
I just think he's passive on his ass because he's like trying to like I'm not in a position to tell him how to dribble better or how to shoot better. Like, I can be a fan and I can say, oh, but I'm not going to be like, I can go coach him. Why is he turning around and saying that, like, I'm not going to tell him he doesn't know how to dribble and he knows how to do it. Like, don't tell me, like, how the science works.
There was no plan in place. There was no vision of like how it's going to work for our team. And I think that really impacted not just me, but a lot of people. So, just had to sit in that hot seat for a little bit and deal with it, man. Life of a martyr, bro.
If only Kyrie Irving was having underground sex parties as opposed to trying to make a living through his elected profession. But the same, by the way, can be said of trade workers, business owners, employees all across New York, and, by the way, the country. Again, for you, the COVID policies were devastating.
The mayor admitting this morning the NYPD's social distancing enforcement efforts aren't working. A rough arrest of a young mother with her child in her hands.
Life-altering. But for people in charge, like Varma, it was actually pretty easy. Well, I'll let him explain it to you.
Oh, like, how did you not, like, go crazy during it? And I think the reason I didn't is because I felt like I had control.
Yeah.
It was getting done to you.
Yeah.
I was like, I was the one, like, making the decisions about what happened. So, like, I didn't feel like I was lost control. And I think that's what really ends up freaking any of us out. Like, when your life is, like, all uncertainty, it's tough, right?
And there it is. Control. People like Varma weren't scared because they were in control. You were scared because you had no control. It was all controlled for you. And there will be another installment on this. But before we get to that, did I mention, in reviewing this footage, I couldn't help but feel compelled to meet Mr. Varma. And so I flew to New York, and we had a little chat. We may never be able to get them to answer. But today, I was able to ask Dr. J. Varma.
Oh my gosh!
There you go.
Join Mug Club today for $89 annually, or try it mugless for $9 a month. You can sign up at louderwithcredit.com/mugclub.
Trump is about to change everything for the United States if they don't kill him first. And we just got some bombshell news on that front, which we'll get to in a moment. It's pretty shocking. Guys, we're at the ultimate tipping point moment for the United States right now. And we better wake up to what's happening. We are going through the largest fundamental change in the structure of the United States and the U.S. dollar in our history. Period. I've got a couple of big news updates to get to today. And these aren't just small stories. They are country-changing items that no one is talking about. But first, on the one side, you have a deep state that wants no borders at all in the United States. It wants to control and monitor everything you do. And they want to come to your home if you're a legal gun owner.
And just because you legally possess a gun in the sanctity of your locked home doesn't mean that we're not going to walk into that home and check to see if you're being responsible.
Here's what our friend Tucker Carlson just said about Kamala's gun statement. This is openly totalitarian. If we don't resist this, we are done. He's absolutely right. And these same nut jobs want a global government run by the United Nations. And the other side wants to return America to what made this country great. Closed borders, self-sustaining by drilling and manufacturing here at home, increasing tariffs so China can't destroy our country with cheap goods, by saying Washington will decide how Americans live their lives, not the United Nations, or some global cabal led by billionaires like Klaus Schwab. Heck, we don't even know who's currently running the United States. Demented President Joe Biden just held his first cabinet meeting in 2024. Yeah, his first cabinet meeting for the entire year. And he immediately turned the meeting over to his wife, Jill, to run the meeting. You can't make this up.
So I'd like to turn it over to Jill and for any comments she has. And it's all yours, kid.
Thank you. You know, sometimes the White House surprises you.
What? She's not president. This is unconstitutional. What the hell is happening here? This is why the deep state cabal is so worried about President Trump, because they know they can't control him. His plan that he just revealed is to go back to the roots of George Washington's statement about keeping America focused on America. There's a novel idea. George Washington believed in isolationism. The deep state and the liberals have tried to make that a bad word, isolationism. It's not. George Washington believed it deeply, keeping foreign governments out of our business. And guess what? We stay out of other countries' business. We cannot go to Afghanistan and turn it into the United States of America. They don't want it, and neither should we. This is Trump's new plan, and they want to kill him for it. I'll talk more about this plan in a minute, but first, this weekend, we learned that the deep state is actively trying to kill Trump using any means necessary. According to Congressman Matt Gaetz, he's learned that 5 different kill teams are now actively trying to kill the former president.
I'll break a little news for you. I had a senior official from the Department of Homeland Security in my office before the second assassination attempt saying that what he has assessed is that there are 5 known assassination teams in the United States.
So there are 5, I just want to follow up, 5 assassination teams. Are they all targeting Trump? Is it other officials?
Yes. No, wow. I should have been clear about that. 5 teams that we know are targeting Trump.
According to the reports, 3 of the kill teams are said to be foreign, and 2 of them are said to be from right here at home, domestic origin. As ex-CIA agent Michael Scheuer just wrote, quote, "There's no news about who's paying them, facilitating their travel, providing them arms and safe houses. Neither is there information about who is paying for them. First, we must assume," he writes, "that the 2 assassination teams that are domestic groups are simply the creatures of the Democratic Party and or the leadership of the Department of Homeland Security and the Secret Service, which appear to have already taken 3 cracks at killing Trump. In other words, our federal government, the deep state cabal, is yes actively trying to assassinate Trump to stop his election and stop his plan from being implemented. They are terrified. This is an unbelievable moment." Another report on Saturday morning says these assassins are now planning to use surface-to-air missiles to take out Trump's plane.
I am going to repeat my public warning here because of my intel sources that there are surface-to-air missiles in possession of some of these kill teams. I think these may be even shoulder-fired.
I mean, this all sounds fake, right? It sounds like a Bourne movie or something, but it's not. You have CIA whistleblowers, government sources confirming these reports, and sitting members of the United States Congress telling us what they've learned. So why are they trying to kill Trump? Well, it's very simple. Follow the money. As we record this on this Sunday in New York City, the United Nations is meeting to vote on their new plan for all of us. It's called the Pact for the Future. And they've kept it hidden from you, of course. But this new plan by the United Nations would essentially take the power out of our country's hands, place them into a global governing body, the United Nations. Call it UN 2.0 is what they're basically calling it. They'll tell us how to eat. They'll tell us what to eat. They'll tell us how we travel. Oh, your carbon footprint, you traveled too much this month. Sorry, you can't go and visit grandma up in Nantucket. How we conduct our finances, controlled by the World Bank and the IMF. This is happening in New York this weekend. I just spoke to investigative journalist Derek Brose, who is at the United Nations as we speak. He says Americans have no idea what's coming.
Of course, this whole thing is a major push towards a global government. They don't like to use those terms. They prefer multilateralism or global governance. But at the end of the day, it's the same thing. It's a more empowered UN to act, to compel nations to do whatever they want. And then the other important aspect that we can get into further is the financial aspect. They keep discussing the need for a new Bretton Woods moment. And of course, Bretton Woods is the post-World War II creation of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank.
It's terrifying. These globalists will stop at nothing. But what they're really scared about is Trump's plan, which I've spent quite a bit of time diving into. And it ends 70 years of the Bretton Woods Agreement. This agreement put in place after World War II. It worked for many years. America would protect all of these countries if they used the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. America would close down factories and manufacturing in the United States and send those factories to your small country to enrich you. You would be able to build up some nice wealth, but you've got to use the U.S. dollar, right? And we'll provide security. That's exactly the plan. That was the Bretton Woods Agreement. Trump is about to kill all of that. The end of Bretton Woods. Bretton Woods has killed America, and Trump's plan kills it. Remember, Bretton Woods was implemented by a global cabal of millionaires. It wasn't voted on by the American people. It's the exact opposite of what George Washington wanted. And there's been no one around to say enough is enough. This is stupid. We've got to end this. You mean we're going to spend billions to build up Ukraine's military while our military is crumbling? You mean we're going to offshore all of this manufacturing so that Europe and other countries can become economic dynamos while America crumbles? Now Trump is about to drop the hammer with his new plan. This new Trump era is an era when America comes back to life. You take the advantages that you gave up to other countries, manufacturing, AI development, energy production, all of it, and you bring it back to America once again. You may love Trump, you may hate Trump, it doesn't really matter. This plan is the reason they are trying to stop him.
Wise leaders always put the good of their own people and their own country first. The future does not belong to globalists.
It's an end to the globalist agenda, and they are terrified of it. Mark my words. And that's the news update part of today's video. Now I want to talk about today's sponsor, which is tied directly to everything I've just...
We got this one from the New York Post. Chicago.
Otherwise, I'll have too much to remember. All right, so let's go back to that first story. Scott, was that story like a big ad for Unjected?
Dude, I mean, I had
There's
notes
so many
here.
clips.
Yes.
Yeah, you should.
Oh, we're all over that. We're all over that.
There are a lot of people out there who did not get vaccinated. They're not all right-wing people, but they are people who are conscientious about their bodies, and they deserve a good dating site. I was just telling my buddy in Charleston about the Unjected and all this sort of stuff that you had started up. So go ahead and make a pitch, because Varma, he opened the door for it.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, definitely. I didn't come up with it. I came along later down the road. Shelby, big shout out to Shelby Hosan in Hawaii, Maui. She's the mastermind and the spearhead of the whole operation. I came in 2022 after they'd been through all the censorship and the nonsense to help them produce the podcast. And as I got more involved, they kind of said, why don't you just come on and help us with all this other stuff? So I can't take credit for any of the heavy lifting, but I've been carrying them along, helping carry along ever since. And I will say we just dropped the brand new cell phone app this week. We have a brand new cell phone app. So against all odds, we got approved back into the Apple and the Google store. And it is awesome. There's a few little glitches that will be like all fixed by like next week. So if you get on there and you're like, oh, this is kind of weird. Yes, we know. I know. I've been fielding emails for the last week, and you guys, we got it under control. All the little glitches are going to be gone very soon, but it is epic. It's so cool. It's like the best dating app on the market, and I'm not even joking. It's got like a social media integration where you can post like reels, kind of like Instagram. We call them unreels. Get it? Really funny. And there's just all these cool features like speed dating and video chats, and just like it's freaking awesome, you guys. And we're so stoked and pumped, and it's live, and people are matching and chatting, and it's happening right now. So in your Apple App Store or Google Play Store, you can find Unjected, which is amazing. But yeah, and you know, if you're worried about undercover operatives, like you're probably not going to find them on Unjected. Like no one's going there to like get you on anything. And even if they do, they're going to be like, damn, we didn't get any good footage. So you know what I mean? But like, yeah, so
you're not going to get catfished like the guy in the last video, Varma.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a catfish free zone, man. And it's so cool because, you know, he was saying like diminishing the fact that people are selective over people who got the vaccine. It's like, oh, that's just a bunch of nonsense. And it's like, well, and then when you look at it on the opposite side of the coin, I know lots of people that would choose to not date somebody if they did take the vaccine. So there's a lot of concerns, valid concerns, I would say, around people who, I'm just saying in general, right? Like, I'm not trying to be, exclusionary if you took the shots, you know what I mean? Like, it's this and that.
You're not trying to discriminate against people who didn't know any better and were.
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't know how to resist a $1 trillion ad campaign like you did. Because at some point the process was made too hard for them, and for whatever reason they capitulated. I know a lot of good people who didn't want to take it, but they took it so they can keep their job, which I think is a crime against humanity yet to be prosecuted.
Yep.
But people, as they find out, then they realize, then they take action, and it's a process. It doesn't all happen in one day.
Totally.
Also,
and I just want to be very clear about that. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, I feel like those are the true victims in this whole thing. Like, obviously the people who have suffered like health consequences, people who have died from it.
And the people who died alone. I thought that was cruel and unusual and inhumane, and it was widely adopted around the world. That was going on. And that was a top-down decision that was made. It was the first time in history, and it was a traumatic event for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I will say too, like in Vax 3, like that is one of the main focuses throughout the movie. They kind of break it up into like the vaccine, the hospital protocols, and then like the remdesivir. But the main chunk of it is like the hospital protocols. They go deep into that, and I learned a lot from that. And it's harrowing and it's crazy. So anyway, just another callback to that. So. Died alone, dude. Just the whole thing died alone, dude. It's just, and it's mostly it's all told from. They did the Vax bus where they drove around and just interviewed people. So pretty much the whole story is just people's firsthand testimony, family members and stuff with lots of evidence. Like, this is not just them speaking out of their behind. Like, this is like it's crazy. So anyway.
Yeah, you can't deal with reality if you don't know about it. So finding out is the first part, and studying and understanding is the next part.
Yeah.
In a separate clip for Jerry, the editor, this is a new clip. There was mention in that last clip with Clayton Morris from Redacted about Joe Biden farming out. It's his first cabinet meeting of 2024. He introduces Jill, his wife, Dr. Jill, and she runs the meeting. And the comments were, he was incapacitated. He's, she's not voted for, she's not elected, these sort of things. I wanted to point out a little bit of history, and we'll also talk about a couple other points that he mentioned, but I want to talk about a little bit of history. Once upon a time, Woodrow Wilson was incapacitated, and his wife ran the country. They didn't bother telling the people of the United States. And, this went on. It's a piece of history. And before he was incapacitated and his wife was running the country, he talked about the deep state cabal. He didn't use the words deep state cabal. We're actually going to read some words that he wrote and try to understand them. But the deep state cabal, that's the same type of people that would be funding modern people with shoulder-fired rockets to try to take Trump off the campaign trail, as it were. I would also point out the history of shoulder-fired rockets in America, I believe, includes TWA-800, which was exploded from a ground-fired ordnance off of Long Island back, I think that was the early 2000s or 90s. FBI special agent, or no, NTSB guy, maybe it's FBI guy, James Kallstrom was the lead investigator on that back in the day. So deep state's a real thing today. Let's go back to the roots and what at least, Woodrow Wilson was able to articulate about they, them, those who can easily be named today, but he does not name them. But he gives some very interesting verbiage pointing toward they, them, those who can be non-elected rulers in this place. And it goes something like this. This is from his book, The New Freedom. This is from page 12, and it's an 8-page quote. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can now understand why people would paraphrase this quote, and then it's easily like debunkable because it's not the whole quote, So there's more detail and nuance to this than what most people realize. Since I have entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. They know that America is not a place of which it can be said as it used to be, that a man may choose his own calling and pursue it just as far as his abilities enable him to pursue it. Because today, if he enters certain fields, there are organizations which will use means against him that will prevent his building up a business that they don't want to have built up. Organizations that will see to it that the ground is cut from under him and the markets are shut against him. For if he begins to sell to certain retail dealers, the monopoly will refuse to sell to those dealers, and those dealers will be afraid and will not buy the new man's wares. And this is the country which has lifted to the admiration of the world its ideals of absolutely free opportunity, where no man is supposed to be under any limitation except the limitation of his character and of his mind, where there is supposed to be no distinction of class, no distinction of blood, no distinction of social status, but where men win or lose on their merits. I lay it very close to my own conscience as a public man whether we can any longer stand at our doors and welcome all newcomers upon those terms. American industry is not free as it once was free. American enterprise is not free. The man with only a little capital is finding it harder to get into the field and more impossible to compete with the big fellow. You might call that the monopoly. Why? Because the laws of this country do not prevent the strong from crushing the weak. That is the reason, and because the strong have crushed the weak, the strong dominate the industry and the economic life in of this country. No man can deny that the lines of endeavor have more and more narrowed and stiffened. No man who knows anything about the development of industry in this country can have failed to observe that the larger kinds of credit are more and more difficult to obtain, unless you obtain them on the terms of uniting your efforts with those who already control the industries of the country. That would be the monopoly. And nobody can fail to observe that any man who tries to set himself up in competition with any process of manufacture which has been taken under the control of large combinations of capital will presently find himself either squeezed out or obliged to sell and allow himself to be absorbed. There is a great deal that needs reconstruction in the United States. I should like to take the census of businessmen, I mean the rank and file of the businessmen, as to whether they think the conditions of this country, or rather, whether the organization of business in this country is satisfactory or not. I know that I know what they would say if they dared. If they could vote secretly, they would vote overwhelmingly that the present organization of business was meant for the big fellows and was not meant for the little fellows, that it was meant for those who were at the top and it was meant to exclude those who were at the bottom. Now, this quote goes on for many more pages, but my point would be the people in control of that monopoly then took over our statecraft in the 21st century, or in the 20th century, and they created tax-exempt foundations which undermined the attitudes, values, behaviors, and beliefs of Americans, and that mutated. So it went from some people who had a monopoly to people who had a monopoly on the planet through the military-industrial media complex, the use of nuclear weapons, the Operation Gladio type Cold War antics of the intelligence agencies, the banks, the insurance companies, precipitating those premises and ill promises down on the people through organizations like the Club of Rome, the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderberg Group, World Economic Forum, these sort of clubs, working groups, if you will, for the same agenda of domineering and bullying people into giving up their rights, giving up their future, giving up their freedom, giving up their dreams for their children and grandchildren in order to obey and be obedient to these ill authorities who are not our friends, who are not people among us trying to make us all better. They are people among us trying to steal our power, and in a parasitical way that we do participate in. We do have some volition and some consent that we can withdraw from these situations. We do have some responsibility for believing things that were not true because they were said in a convincing way over and over again by mainstream media. Shame on us. So if we take self-responsibility, we own the solution. If we blame it entirely on them, we become a victim. So learning how to recognize, self-correct in these situations, I think is very important. And there's one more piece to this puzzle, because there was mention of the IMF. That was Derek Rose and Clayton. What's Clayton's last name? Clayton
Morris.
Morris. Thank you, sir. They were talking about the IMF and the UN and this new kind of WHO directive over everybody. Well, this is also interesting too, because back right at the end of World War II, the Americans get this special relationship with the British Empire and everything starts popping off. You have the United Nations, you have the CIA, you have the creation of Israel, you have the World Bank as well, you have the IMF as well, and you also have the Bank for International Settlements, which is up here. It was created shortly before that, but it's the same group of people. They're the same group of people that funded the Tiny Mustache Man. They're the same group of people that took over his plans and brought him back to America and Britain afterwards. They're the same people who made up fake dossiers about him and said he was related to the Rothschilds, right? So there's a whole milieu of infection that has gotten into our culture over the past century. And some of it's a little gangrenous. Some of it can be saved. The parts that are gangrenous, I argue we really don't need at this point. When you have a worldwide system of Common Core education, or it's really indoctrination, created by the same central group of, they, them, those who can easily be named, who are enacting the will of Cecil Rhodes to bring America back into the empire so they could take over the whole world and have domination forever. That's their plan. Their plan sucks, but their plan has been going on unimpeded for like 120 years at this point. It's only now, when it's about to reach its crescendo, that people can learn to step up, learn the history, and say, Andrew Carnegie, interesting guy. His foundation in his name is like a ghost. He's no longer here, but this foundation carries out an internationalist will. Now, I also have a book over here by Andrew Carnegie, and it's from like 1896. It's called Triumphant Democracy. I own a first edition copy. So if you want to know about globalism and internationalism and the New World Order, like, learn it in the people who wrote about it and created the ideas in the first place. Learn it. They left their own words to describe these things. You don't need to be conspiratorial. You simply need to be literate and educated in an area of interest around these topics, because they are they, them, those who are doing all this non-elected ruler stuff, including COVID, including, deep state attempts on Trump's life, all these great things. So becoming educated is not a thing that happens overnight. It's a continual process of you being diligent and having some determination and some curiosity to understand who, what, why, where, when, and how of all these situations. And that's the line of questioning that allowed me to build a model over the years, because I had to ask and answer these questions. I know about each and everything in this model with 10,000 items in it and 50,000 connections, because this is a recording of my learning process since 2008. So to be able to click into an idea, this brings up more detail than I can remember. But I can remember about all these things once I see it. What was the connect? Oh, there's a relationship between Wilhelm Wundt and Edward Bernays. What is that? Well, there's a whole PhD lineage that leads down to a society that can be controlled by propaganda and public opinion to start with. And there's a whole Sigmund Freud joint ligature in there, because Wundt was in the 1800s. Freud brings it into the 20th century to influence people like Bernays, who's the nephew of Freud. So all these types of things, you can't learn about them in one day, but learning about them is a very powerful thing. And history is something that we are continuing to, in Kamala's words, like, history's going on and we are part of history. Like, this is a truism of our day. We don't realize we are still part of the creation of the story, and we are not just subject to what we're being told. We can have active participation. We can go from being a spectator to a player on the field. And when you play within the bounds of moral integrity, and you have an objective perspective, and you try to take in all sides, and you're doing your best to understand and not just be prejudiced, right? You're making a judicial decision prior to examining the facts. That's classically a symbol. It's a earmark of ignorance, you might say. So
wow, that was awesome, man. Can I ask you a question
for sure.
out of all that?
Yeah, what do you got?
Okay, so I don't want to derail too much, but there's something that really stood out there, and I've heard the rumors about, like, Hitler being related to the Rothschild, like the Schickel-Gruber, that whole bloodline. And you said that the IMF fabricated documents to kind of insinuate.
No, not the IMF. Here, I'll take you back over here to the history blueprint. CIA, OSS technically did it.
Okay.
So the Langer report is
Langer
an OSS document. So if you just I'll pull up the wiki for you here when I get back to it. So during World War II, MI6 and OSS produced something called the Langer Report, and I'll bring it up over here in a browser. Here we go. The Mind of Tiny Mustache Man. And it says OSS, but we had a lot of MI6 influence. This guy also has an interesting history. He might have had a teaching position where he influenced the guy called Uncle Ted or something like that. That's an interesting Harvardism. Anyway, history of the report, Wild Bill Donovan, who was completely placed there by MI6. So it goes MI6 to Donovan to like the rest of OSS. Here's the New School for Social Research. We just saw that in History Blueprint. That's also another interesting part. And so they make up this fake dossier, and they give him some pejoratives. They're like, he's got some, he's like Jay Varna. He's got some of those proclivities. Now, if I hit Control F and I hit ROTH, there we go. The report briefly mentions claims that a Rothschild fathered Alois Tiny Mustache Man, Adolf's father, who was illegitimate, when Hitler's paternal grandmother, Maria Schicklgruber, allegedly worked as a house servant in Vienna, but concludes, quote, "It is not absolutely necessary to assume that he had Jewish blood in his veins in order to make a comprehensive picture of his character with its manifold traits and settlements. From a purely scientific point of view, therefore, it is sounder not to base our reconstruction on such slim evidence, but to seek firmer foundations. Nevertheless, we can leave it as a possibility." So they leave it in there, even though they know it's a bunk report, right? Which requires further verification. And let's see. After any afterward by weight, the book identifies some factual errors in a wartime report, and it goes through. But there's also there's like a not a dossier, but there's like an affidavit from which they took this information on Rothschild, and it looked like it was just like a confidential informant making some stuff up because he thought it'd be convenient. So anyway, the official story is they don't think it's true, but it's in there, right? So it's an interesting piece of history. And it comes from MI6 and OSS. And Langer, he's an interesting character too. He's got some history in like mind control and stuff like that for CIA, MK Ultra type stuff. So,
wow, awesome. Yeah, thanks for that, because I'd heard that, but I had no idea what the source of reference was. So I'm definitely going to look into that. That's fascinating. Cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of that fascinating stuff. There's another fascinating part where Hitler, is it the same? Yeah, so they claim in the OSS report that Hitler's father comes from Maria Schicklgruber, who worked in the Rothschild Vienna, Austria household, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's actually the only Rothschild family that Hitler jacks because they live in Austria. They didn't move out because the German Rothschilds move out in like 1905, 1911. They closed down the bank before World War I for some reason. Very, very convenient. And then they go back and they open it later after the world wars are done. But in between time, there was only one Rothschild family there for him to jack. And then he kidnaps them. He keeps them, well off, like being fed. There's a butler. It's like a mansion type situation, not a prison. And he's trying to like use him as a bartering chip. Like, I've got your guy and you guys can give me some stuff. I don't know. He probably needed oil and stuff like that for the army because they didn't have petroleum. They had to use this other synthetic concoction in order to run stuff. So anyway, there was some stuff that he wanted and they were trying to barter, and they did end up cutting a deal and he got out. So interesting parts of it. So
very interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Twice a year, I teach a course called Autonomy. It's a 12-week course. It teaches leadership, entrepreneur skills, executive skills, all these types of things that I saw were taken out of our education system in order to make the schooling or indoctrination system that we've all probably went through. And it has served us well enough to be interchangeable cogs in the machine of the globalists. But if we want a homestead, if we want write our own ticket, work from home job, work from anywhere type of situation, they're not exactly handing those out at the end of college. They give you a piece of paper and they're like, good luck. So reality is dropping us off here, but the demands of reality are up here. So I created Autonomy to help people close that gap for themselves so they can level up their skills to the demands of the situations that life is putting in front of us presently. life's demands of intellect and understanding precision and complexity are ever increasing. The schooling didn't prepare us for it. The media is not going to do anything but reinforce what schooling prepared us for. And so we're going to have to take a leadership position and take steps off the beaten path to kind of blaze our own trail in life. What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.